I still think every time I see Mark Zuckerberg now, he just looks like a robot. Like I keep expecting someone to say he's just an avatar because he doesn't look human to me.
He seems like a blank humanoid, like body synthesized to go over some weird cyborg alien. Like, you know what I mean?
He's like iRobot with it. It's just, I don't know what it is about. Is it the hair? Is the smoothness of his skin? I'm not sure. It's like he's been CG'd. And when I watched that whole presentation he gave, I couldn't get over it. I kept expecting him to say, and this whole time I've been as an avatar. And nope, that's just his face. Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the BizDev Podcast, the podcast about developing your business. I'm David Baxter. I'm your host. I'm joined by Gary Voigt. How you doing, man?
Pretty good. How are you?
I cannot complain, man. So let's jump right into it. So last week we covered the Metaverse as Facebook claims it, and they renamed themselves, that whole big thing. And this week, and I'm sure someone is really grumpy about this, but Microsoft launches their ideas of the Metaverse, in which we have no legs. That's apparently the future, is we all lose our legs. We'll link this in the story notes, but they basically had a big demo, and their future is work, right? So Facebook is all about play with a little bit of work spread in there, and Microsoft is...
It's about spreadsheets and Word docs.
Spreadsheets, Word docs, and PowerPoint. But it's all right now. They're connecting it all to Teams, which I'm sure Slack is really enjoying. But you can, in the future, they're saying next year, you'll be able to, if you have, I guess, a HoloLens, which is that's not VR, that's AR. You can see through it. That's the difference. If you are doing a VR helmet, it's opaque and you can't see the real world around you. And if you have AR, which stands for augmented reality, you can see through it. They're like glasses. So theirs is an AR helmet, which is really focused on the enterprise. You can't buy this as a regular dude. If you've ever seen the HoloLens, it was way ahead of its time, and it's pretty neat, but it's got a very limited, like they love the demo of you need to repair your sink. You can call in a plumber and he will guide you through it through AR stuff.
You're looking through the lens like it's someone else. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they announced their businessy version of the Metaverse, which is Teams meetings in which you have a 3D avatar, floating one, no legs. Really, you have to see the demo. It
reminds me of the Nintendo Wii when that came out, and the little sports games that you would play, how the little avatars. They're
a little better
around.
Than that.
Yeah,
they look better than that, but they have that same kind of ethereal look to them. But the concept here, I mean, like, Facebook's idea of work is that I put on my goggles and I've recreated my computer. And if I want another monitor, I can create one. If I want a whiteboard, I can create one. And it's all in a AR physical kind of space. I'm sitting around my computer. I put my goggles on and everybody puts their goggles on. And now we're all little cartoon people.
And you're sitting around a conference table.
I don't understand the appeal of that. I'm missing something here. I mean, maybe in Corona land where we're all remote, but I would just rather see your face on a Zoom meeting, right? What is this adding to the equation?
From my perspective, I think it's just, I'm not a Microsoft user, and I don't not like the company, but I've noticed that they always make these like giant, broad claims of technology from the future and everything is going to change, and then they seem to come up short. So this to me seems like overkill for something that they want to envision as the future of computing with Microsoft. But I mean, kind of like they did with the Surface. Remember, they were like, oh, you're going to have a Surface tablet in every business, every hotel, restaurant, everywhere, around the world. And
I still want a Surface, though. I want one of those big TVs. If they weren't $80,000, I would totally have one. Sorry.
Point being... They make these grand presentations about something that seems like it could be really cool, but then when it comes down to the actual execution of it, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, it's a legless avatar.
Yeah, they used to do these videos, and you can find them on the interwebs. They haven't done them in years. The House of the Future.
They were impressive.
Those were really cool. And they were shooting for the stars there. Like, this was very much vaporware. But what was impressive about it is it changed your dynamic of how you thought of things. Like, everything was a screen. You had, everywhere you could communicate, and your kitchen counter had a screen, and you could do all sorts of stuff, and you put things on it and it recognized what that was.
And everything
Just
was
some
linked,
really
everything was linked together for ease of use and access. And yeah,
super neat stuff. And it was shooting for the stars. I mean, we couldn't do that now if we tried. But, and I think that Facebook, when they said, here's our metaverse, here's our demos, right? They're realistic looking people. They're doing realistic looking things. They have cloth, right? Their clothes move, right? It's just really fancy stuff. And of course they can't do that now, but it was shooting in the future. And you're like, oh, wow, that's really changing how, like, the idea of sitting in a coffee shop and being able to pull up 3 40-inch monitors to be able to get my work done is really neat to me. And I never even thought about that. And Microsoft's idea here just seems very iterative. Oh, I have a me, right? That's what Microsoft calls their, or Nintendo called their little guys. I have a little me there, and he can't move very much, and he's got no feet, and I'm not inspired at all here. And like, am I supposed to be inspired by these demos? Like, am I supposed to be excited that this is next year I'm looking at? I'm not excited. Are you excited?
I'm not excited at all. To me, it just seems like another. Okay, so you walk into a virtual corporate building, you sit at a virtual table in a conference room with other
you're not sitting,
business people. Well, okay, you're right. You're hovering near the edge of a conference table with all these other people. Like, I mean, they might as well all have ties and suit jackets on. It just seems very like, hey, look, it's business, but virtual. And our perception of business is exactly like the, late 80s, early 90s perception of business.
You can't have a business application where everyone comes in and they're, I'm a dinosaur and you're a fairy princess and this guy is a knight and we're all having a conversation. That's not going to work.
Well, no,
so
kidding.
I think they have to be buttoned up. I'm just saying they have to be businessy, right?
But what I mean is, it just seems like that's the only environment this is made for. It's just that business meeting, business documents, salespeople and managers. That's it.
Which is a start. I mean, I still am excited about the idea that I could put on goggles and like, I like Zoom meetings, but they're missing a physicality to them. And if the metaverse or whatever it ends up getting called is going to add that back to a virtual meeting, like I could go and really feel like and I could stand up and I can walk to a virtual whiteboard but I'm doing that across the country.
Yeah.
I see that as something, a good advancement. I mean, Zoom is great. Don't get me wrong. It's way better than a phone call. But I still think there is a very big place to get business done. Now, airlines hate this idea, right? But there's still this idea that I could get business done remotely in the same vein as it's in person.
Yeah.
Like when I can see your face moving. Now, I don't understand where avatars come in there, but whatever.
Adding that little layer of like social interaction that seems a little bit closer to reality is definitely a plus. And yeah, having the idea, can you imagine like some of our clients are in California on the West Coast, or if they're, across into Europe or whatever. Granted, you're going to have a little time change thing, but if you guys can get together and it's more than a Zoom, or you're like standing in their virtual office looking at what they're looking at, like, and then the surroundings are actually the surroundings outside where they live. So you're like, that'd be pretty cool.
There is something to be said about business in the virtual world. I'm just not sure Microsoft is showing that.
Yeah.
And as a demo to say, this is the future. I'm like, meh. I don't want that future. I don't think. There are legs in my future. That's what I'm saying.
Now, last week, we ended on a question that we need to talk about.
We did. We ended in a cliffhanger for the very first time. And I know everybody was bated breath, been waiting for this podcast this week to answer the question that we didn't end on. And so as a refresher, we had Scott sent us a question. As a startup, should you pull funding from your own savings, money from another business you own, or go to investor and or mixture of all of those? And I love that question because there are a million ways to answer. So I'm going to profess my opinion here because, and I say that because I'm not saying I am an authority in the fact that other people who have very different ideas aren't right. I just don't think they are. So it's an opinion. I want to be clear about that. But I am a very big believer that a startup should, in most cases, there are edge cases. If you're trying to conquer the world, like an Airbnb type of idea, you're going to need money. There's no way around it. You're going to need a lot of money. But very few startup ideas are like that. And I think the problem is a lot of people think they have to fund themselves the same way. And that's where I really push, because most of our clients are smaller startups. They've got ideas. They're very niche ideas typically. And I push very, very hard that they try to figure out a way to fund this themselves or with friends and family rather than institutional investors. So that would be my step. The quick answer is, I would say step one, if you can, go use your own money. Now, the caveat there is don't put yourself in debt for this, right? Don't max out your credit cards. Don't do something stupid that's going to put you at financial risk. That's not what I'm saying. But if you have friends and family who, you got a wealthy uncle, right? We all have the wealthy uncle somewhere. Oh no, we don't all have that. Why do I say that? But that's the classic example, right? Daddy Warbucks and all that. That's where it's a safe place to get money to a point, and it's a small amount of money, and it's enough to get you moving. Like I said in our earlier podcast about the cost of things, a good startup is going to cost a couple $100,000 to get up and running. But if you take on investment, here's the example I've used before. I'm a bit tangent here, but the example I've used before, if I have a startup that I funded myself and it's making $1 million in revenue, right? I can pay myself a salary of $200,000 a year pretty easily off of $1 million in revenue. If I have a software startup, let me be clear on that. If you're doing jeans, probably not. But if you're doing a software startup, you probably, when you're talking about development and all the stuff on ongoing, you could pay yourself a really nice salary and you're living very well, right? You can buy a nice house. You can take care of your family. $200,000 is a lot of money. Now imagine you took a $250,000 or $1 million and you're making that same revenue. Well, you're still eating ramen, right? You're not making any salary at all because you owe a ton of money to somebody.
Right.
So you don't get any of that. And that's really where I push hard to, if at all possible, you should fund it yourself.
Now, when you gave the answer of funding it yourself too, I kind of went with more of a, I guess, emotional hook of, if you are funding it yourself, then it seems like you're going to have to put in that extra amount of passion and dedication to it to make sure that it happens. There could be a little bit of a disconnect, say if there is, like you said, a rich uncle or whatever, like, here's some money, pay me back whenever you feel like it, don't worry about it. I believe in your idea, but yeah, here's a safe place to start. Then you don't really have that, I guess, fear of maybe losing it. So then you're not quite as motivated, maybe.
I agree with the fact if it's your money, you have this intangible benefit that you are driven hard to succeed, more so than I think. And I think there's one step. If I get it from the rich uncle, I'm not as motivated if it's my money, but it's still my uncle. And I really feel a desire to pay that guy back.
Right.
The problem is the disconnect, I think a lot of times, is when it's someone you don't know's money, some investor. And you're like, well, he lost his money. He knew what the risks he was getting into, right? And you're disconnected. I think that passion, that drive is lessened, not completely removed. Don't get me wrong. People who take money are very driven people. But I just think I always think of it like with the kid, the 16-year-old whose parents buy them their first car. Now, let's say they bought him a nice car, not some clunker, but a nice brand new car. That kid is not going to appreciate it nearly as much as if he saved up, worked hard, and bought himself that car. And he's not going to take as good of care of that car. He's not going to, show it off as much. The passion, the love of that car is way, way less if mama buys it than it is if, dude, I saved up, I waited tables for 4 years, and I finally bought myself this Corolla.
100% agree.
And I think the same thing with startups. If you've taken money from some invisible person who you don't have any personal connection to, that drive is lessened. It's not removed. You're still a driven person or you wouldn't be an entrepreneur. but I think that it changes how you approach things.
Right.
And I want you to feel that heat. I want your butt to be on fire because you've got this much runway that and otherwise, you got to go back to your wife and say, hey, our savings that you said we could use for this business. Yeah, I blew that. Right. I want you to feel that weight because that's going to make you get up at 5 a.m. That's going to make you work till 10 p.m. It's going to make you find the right partner rather than the first guy who walks in the door. It's going to light you up. And that's where I would lean.
I also believe that in those steps where there's going to be small successes as you're starting, you're going to take those little accomplishments and you're going to internalize them as huge wins, which is going to fire you up to go further, dedicate yourself a little bit more, find new ways to accomplish these tasks to get to your goal. And it's really going to motivate you to keep going.
When I want to, and I'm not going to go into this time, but I want to put this as a placeholder for a future podcast that we should revisit this topic. And that topic is the slog, which is where startups die. And this ties right into that is the people who are in the slog, which is really
that an
quickly,
acronym?
The slog is, no, it is a term I made up that is the time after launch and no one cares. And that's, your job is to make people care. It is a very lonely place to be. And that's where startups die. So I just think that what you're saying is, hey, those little victories when you've self-funded, man, those are huge. And those are also what's going to get you through that slog that I mentioned.
Yeah.
But we will talk about that more in depth in a future episode because it is worth talking about because I promise that's where your startup will die. 9 times out of 10. So I think that, do you have anything to add there? I really think that sums it up. That answers that question, but it's worth the deeper dive.
Yeah. That passion and that fire. I think there's something to be said about the difference between feeling pressure and feeling passion. Now, they can kind of go hand in hand because it's still going to be that stressful, weird, nervous energy in the back of your head, and you're going to feel like you have to do something. But from taking the position of funding it yourself, that have to do something is going to seem to have a bit more of a positive impact and more of a driven push in a positive direction, where I got to pay back my uncle seems to be, I got to figure something out here, a little stressful, don't know where I'm going, what's next, I need help. You know what I mean? There's a little bit of a, just, I guess you can say, switch in your psyche or how you approach it. So again, agreeing with you with the funding yourself, agreeing with you with the car story of kind of earning it on your own, and the little victories will definitely help guide you.
What I think is also worth noting, and these are all the intangibles, but it's also going to change how you build your startup. I've said from, I think, our first episode that I push really hard for revenue first. And if you're self-funding, this thing has to stand on its own way faster than if I'm borrowing money from an institutional investor, right?
Yeah.
And again, there's a place for investments. I'm not saying that's bad at all, but if I know I've got 5 years of runway, my motivation for revenue generation is way different than if I've got 6 months before I have to tell my wife that I just blew the college fund.
Right.
Right. It's a very big thing, and it's going to change how you get up every morning and the decisions you make. And it's all indirect, but it's worth noting.
Now, have you seen the smaller startups that are self-funded, if they start to stand up on their own, at that point, is it easier for them to get investors and more money to go to, step 2, step 3? Oh,
absolutely. So if there's 2 types of investments that I've seen. There is the early stage stuff where they're investing in the person, not the idea, right?
Right.
Man, this girl here, she knows her stuff and she's a passionate person, and I don't even care what she builds, but I think she's worth taking a chance on. That's one type of investment. The other type is, this is a great idea. There's some revenue here. All they need is some money to grow and explode, and I'll make my money back, right? Those are 2 major types of investments. And if you have self-funded and now it's doing well, you can get that second type of investment much, much easier. And the other thing that keep in mind is once you take investments, you can never become, well, not never, but very hard to become bootstrapped again, right? You've taken that path. But if you've bootstrapped, you can always go the investment route. Right. You can always choose to do that later. And that's worth noting. So if you get started bootstrapped up, do it yourself, and then you go, man, I think I'm ready for it to really explode. I want to borrow some money. Fabulous. But if you went the other way, you can't go, man, I wish I bootstrapped. Then that's just regret. And that doesn't help anybody. Have you seen the movie Dune yet?
I have. I read the books. I read the books. I don't know if I've read all the books, but I do remember reading Dune books in like elementary school leading into middle school. And I remember getting kind of lost in the books where it seemed very complex and complicated, but there was worms in a desert or whatever. So going in to watch this movie, I was like, well, I don't really expect much, but I was completely blown away and super impressed with the way they turned what I thought was super confusing as a kid into more digestible little story arcs. And visually, I can't, like, every single frame of that movie, from audio and visual, like, just beautiful.
Now, did you see the 80s version?
No, I did not.
Okay. So that's my stepfather loved that movie. And I hated it. Like, I thought it was gross. The way they made the Baron. If you've seen that movie, he's got all these like boils. I don't even know how you explain. You have Sting is in the movie, and he wears this metal loincloth.
I thought that was Labyrinth.
No, that's David Bowie, man. What's wrong with you?
I'm joking.
Get out. That's a great movie. Don't talk bad about Labyrinth. I love that movie. Anyway, it was just a weird movie.
So New Dune, step up.
New Dune. So I say all that because I was leery. I had these blinders on that was from the 80s movie that I just, as a kid, I mean, I was a little kid when that was out. And I was like, oh, okay. But I agree with you. This movie was gorgeous. I love, as a sci-fi nerd, I love how they did the shields.
Oh yeah.
I thought that was super neat and visually very cool. And I loved the worm. I love
every environment and like the CG was done so well. Like the sand
it's hard
everywhere. How in the world did they make that look so
We
real?
are to the point where I just don't, unless it's just really, really painfully obvious that's a CG person or a creature. There's so much background CG. I think Game of Thrones is what really blew my mind. There's so much background CG that you swear is real.
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings also did the same thing. If you ever look at the behind the scenes of those and you see where they're really standing, and then you look at it where it is in the show and all the background stuff that they add, and you don't even think twice about it, but it is all CG. And like, I remember in Dune I bring this up because Dune does that very, very well. I remember seeing a behind the scenes thing of one of the Man of Steel movies. And it was where Superman is standing on the steps of the Capitol building. And it's about to blow up or whatever. And that entire scene, the only thing that was real was the steps he was standing on.
Yeah.
Even including his cape. Like, none of it was real. And I swear when I watched it, I thought he was standing at the Capitol. And Dune, I think, takes that to they're just getting, like, even the worms look real, even though very clearly they are not real. Or the helicopters.
The dragonfly. The dragonfly helicopters were so rad. No, but
the only complaint I have about it is how it ended. I mean, I know it's a part one, but that is abrupt.
Don't spoil it for anybody.
Done. That's fine. No, I don't want to spoil it. But it's like, I didn't know the whole time they had been advertising it is just Dune. And then at the very beginning it's Dune Part 1. And I'm like,
and
what is that?
That title card was literally on screen for like half a second.
Yeah, so you forget about it because it's a 2.5 hour movie. So you're like, okay, cool. Boom, 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 done. I mean, a hard stop.
I will say though, if you do get into it, now at my house, my wife not into it so much. So after about
kids fell asleep when
15 minutes, she kind of checked out. Me and my daughter got into it, and it's like once you lock in and you're interested in that story, and then 2.5 hours later, it ends, and you're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
When's part two?
Yeah. Well, and that's what I think is also frustrating is they didn't greenlight part 2.
Until
to me,
after.
if you're going to build a movie like that and it's going to be part 1 and part 2, you need to film both at the same time so that there's not this huge gap. Because that means it's probably 3 years out until they finish that. Now everyone's going to look a little different because they've aged and this, that, and the other. I mean, that's not that big of a deal because there's no kids in the movie. But the main character, I don't remember his name. He's got a French sounding name.
Timothy Chalamet.
Chalamet. Yes, that's perfect. Nailed it.
Yeah.
He's going to look different in 2 years. And Zendaya is going to look different in 2 years just because they're younger people.
Right.
And I just, man, come on. If you're going to do that, and the director says, I have a vision for this movie. And this vision is that it's going to be 2 movies. And when you okay that, you need to okay both. That's just my personal thing. They've already approved the second one, so it is being made at least. I mean, can you imagine they build it and then like, nah.
I've read a rumor that they're already writing a 3rd one, but again, that could just be.
That's going to be like the Hobbit series that they took one book and turned it into 3 movies. And I still to this day, and I loved The Hobbit. That's the only J.R.R. Tolkien book I've actually finished. I tried to read the original one to my son when he was a kid. And if you've ever read that book, there's a lot of songs in it that are like 4 or 5 pages long of poetry. And my son was like 8. And he's like, not another poem, Dad. I'm like, we're reading every word. And I'm pronouncing Elvish. I mean, the whole bit. And we didn't finish that book, though, interestingly enough. But The Hobbit was a great little book. And then they turned it into 3 movies. And I had no idea what happened. I have no idea. I mean, you got Smaug, and that was awesome. And then the rest of the movie, I have no idea. So I'm afraid they're going to do that here. They're trying to turn it into like a 17-part multiverse of Dune.
Yeah, unfortunately, when that commercialism steps in and they see box office or streaming numbers go up, they're going to turn what would have been a good 2-part movie into a 6-part movie and just keep pulling in that revenue. And that's where creativity goes to die.
Well, and books do the same thing.
Perfect example. There was a TV show called Heroes. Do you remember that?
I loved that show.
Yeah, it was supposed to be a 1-season thing. It was
really?
It was written as 13 parts, beginning and end. They got to episode 9, and basically the network were like, by the way, guys, we're doing 2 more seasons. And they're like, but the story's over. They're like, not anymore.
Yeah,
like, we already wrote it. They're like, well, we're going to get some new writers in here then. See ya.
It got weird in the later seasons. My daughter's reading this series of books. The reason it started was we were doing this long trip from Raleigh to Dallas, and we were listening to an audiobook. And I can't remember the name of it, but it's basically a whodunit. A girl died, and the whole book is you have to find out who killed her, right? And
gives you little tidbits of like evidence and stuff along the way.
And it's a great whodunit. And we're listening to it, and the book ends, and you still don't know. And then we find out that it's actually a 6-part. There's 6 books in this series, and we're like, oh my gosh, I'm so angry at myself that I listened to this. But at the same time, my daughter was like, I'm done. I'm going. She's on book 5 now. So I mean, I guess it works, but no, thank you.
Oh, and my apologies to anybody out there that are, TV or movie files that if I'm getting facts wrong and dates wrong, I apologize. I don't know if Heroes was 2 seasons or 3. Or
it was more than 2.
But you get the idea.
Yeah, that first season when the main bad guy, the way he got his powers always creeped me out.
Yeah.
Anyway. All right. I think on that fun note, I think we're going to end it up.
We don't have any questions this week, do we?
This week, we have no questions or comments, but we're going to start publishing these on YouTube, which I'm hoping will get us a little more comment action.
We'll get comments for sure.
yeah, I'm sure. Well, hopefully they're nice comments, but we will. I think that will spur the questions and stuff because it's easier. A lot of people just don't want to send an email, so
that's true.
Be on the lookout for that. We will start putting these out on YouTube. And with that, I think we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much, everybody. We will talk to you next week.
See you next week.